want to tell us a joke?
Okay. Here's one. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
So the world of Joker is interesting, not because it's truly dangerous, but because we know deep down, it does not offer fiction. It holds up a mirror, a distorted one, but a mirror nonetheless. The one in which, outside of context of fiction, we would never willfully look into. These are the thoughts we would rather not entertain because there are things we would rather not see, hence admit about ourselves as individuals and as a society. Our willful ignorance, apathy towards ones who hurt, unwillingness to help, empathy that only extends towards familiar, and complete rejection and disdain of unfamiliar. Corruption, abuse of power, riots, protests, disregard for the importance of humanitarian institutions and aid. All these things are happening all over the world as we speak, but it's not a fun train of thought to have. So we as individuals and as a society have rewired our brains to push those aside to an extent where our own reality turns into fiction. To be scared of exploring the world of Joker and Joker himself is not to be scared of facing fiction. It is a fear of facing your own world that can be just as dangerous, effed up, and unethical. The fear of glamorizing the Joker as a symbol is redundant and comes from a place of ignorance and insulation. To be scared of Joker is to be scared of our own shadow. He is nothing but a harmless pile of fictional words that imitates life. Joker as a piece of fiction itself, however, does not prompt imitation, it elicits discussion. What people misunderstand about popular discourse is that being discussed does not equate to the ideas within it being any closer to actualization than they were before such discourse. Whether we realize it or not, discussion is part of our DNA. It is not something we choose to have, it's something that organically happens for us to become better and progress as a society. Discussions may be frustrating, but they are integral, and anything that organically prompts such conversations should be invited and welcomed, since the instinct to automatically jump into discourse means it speaks to an unanswered question we all had within us that now, through this piece of art, is being brought to the surface, not born through it. Again, it's just a color-corrected, cinematic mirror that we are forced to look into and deal with what we see in it, and nothing about that is evil or dangerous. The same thing happened with Thanos. The same thing happened with Heath Ledger's Joker back in 2008, whose blind worshipping at the time is forgotten and widely overlooked today. And the same thing happened in 2019, when Todd Phillips, to his own dismay, accidentally opened up the Pandora's box that is Arthur Fleck. And 2024's Joker 2 is nothing but a pathetic attempt from Todd Phillips himself to ruthlessly bang the Pandora's box back to shut. Joker 2 takes something catalytic and deeply resonant to the huge masses of people and turns it clinical and soulless. We don't get answers to questions or aid for the anxieties the first film awoke in us. What happens when the world is pushed too far? What happens when the discarded and neglected individuals start reciprocating the pain and suffering the privileged higher-ups have brought upon them? Joker was to be disposed of because too many people resonated with the isolated, traumatizing, mentally suffocating, passive, and at times aggressive cruelty of his everyday life. And if Arthur gets away with revenge, these same people might be just stupid enough to get ideas, because Todd Phillips thinks of himself as that powerful. In order to escape highly improbable consequences of potential answers, Todd Phillips chooses the most cowardly, surgical path to move on with the story. He punches a hole through a fourth wall and stabs the root of such chaotic events with his own hand, so he does not have to deal with chaotic fictional universe of his own making. And when I say the word stab, I don't just mean physically, also figuratively. Arthur Fleck was never truly the Joker. He was never particularly intelligent, competent, driven, or cool, the classic traits we associate with Joker. But he is vulnerable, honest, and has a knack for justice, things we deeply relate and sympathize with. However, what we get to see at the end of the first movie is a Joker. He dresses like Joker, he acts like Joker, he calls himself Joker, he is a clown in a movie called The Joker. Heck, the script itself says he is Joker now. But since Arthur Fleck is not allowed to be a symbol of rebellion anymore. Because Todd Phillips is too much of a snowflake and or an idiot to even discuss the concept of anarchy even in fiction, Joker turned into a made-up ramblings of a mentally ill person. And Arthur, as a character, is left with a half-baked romance arc that is not even worth mentioning, and becomes an empty shell of a character left over from what he used to be before the writers decided to strip him of his main defining characteristics.
You think men like Thomas Wayne ever think what it's like to be someone like me? To be somebody but themselves? They don't. They think that we'll just sit there and take it like good little boys, that we won't werewolf and go wild.
Hence, strip the story not from a potential danger, but from important discussions and revelations we are aching to have as a society through art. So what does Joker 2 offer as a substitute? Prison hallways, pills, courtrooms, musical numbers, rape, and death, because that's life. Phillips refuses to tell a story about a villain who is an embodiment of a warning sign to the society. He would rather tell a mental illness person's story that, intentionally or not, serves a message of, if you are a nice, harmless, traumatized person in therapy, you will be oppressed, bullied, beaten, forgotten, alone, and unloved. If you are a murderous sociopath, you will be jailed, bullied, beaten, and raped. And if you try to own up to your mistakes and take responsibility, you will get killed. Because whatever the fuck Frank Sinatra sang in that one song. For someone so devoted to stories exploring and depicting mental illnesses, Todd Phillips does not particularly seem to take liking in these same people, does he? Since apparently if you suffer from trauma and mental problems, you're marked for eternal lifelong suffering and a meaningless tragic end, no matter what you do. Because always remember, that's life. The audience does not want to see the Joker because they want to see the world burn. They want to satisfy their curiosity that this deeply intriguing, contradictory character elicits in us. The film thinks that the smartest and safest way to approach the untamed beast that is Arthur Fleck is to ground him and his story in reality as much as possible, in order to not further feed into the idea of him as a symbol. Give commentary about real-life consequences of criminal deeds and demonstration of the most likely thing to happen, which is that Arthur's life after the criminal events of Joker would not be this climactic, glamorized, comic book-esque villain journey, but would amount to nothing, and would become essentially nothing. And that take on the character is not the most satisfying or rewarding one in any shape or form, but it is a probable outcome, and I would understand why one would entertain the possibility of Joker's failure to ever fully actualize himself. However, what I could never understand is, what's even the point of spending $200 million and 3 hours on depicting something that is essentially nothing? If your main point to make, Todd, was that murdering people comes with consequences and worthless existence, I have bad news for you. We know. We know exactly what happens to criminals in real life, and it's not anything groundbreaking. So your point is as meaningless as your movie is. And no, turning it into a musical that is basically cats with less fur will not make this pointless story ever worth telling.
I mean, it's just, I could really watch that scene a lot. Obviously, I've seen it a million times, but Joaquin's portrayal of Arthur is so heartbreaking because he just wants people to understand who he is, and everybody's just interested in the sensational part, in the Joker, in the intrigue of the murders and the thing, and Arthur just wants people to know who he is. Again, I find it really
Joker
tragic.
2 is a movie too poorly versed in legal matters to ever be respected as a courtroom drama. It's too uneventful to be regarded as a comic book film or an action flick. It's too soulless to ever function as a musical. It's too incompetent at understanding the human psyche to ever sell itself as a psychological drama. It's an empty film that is so fixated on dodging certain statements that it forgets to ever actually say anything at all. There's a weird thing about pretentiousness. It almost comes with a smell, you could argue. It's really hard to put a finger on what exactly communicates to you that you're in an undeniable presence of one heck of a reeking snubby pompous, but oh, can you sense it? And if there was a cover person for that particular fragrance, it would be Todd Phillips. I'm sure you've noticed there has been a new age of filmmakers, and by that I don't mean great ones. Ones I personally refer to as pick-me filmmakers. This is mostly a post-MCU phenomenon. The directors who think of themselves as too above particular brands of storytelling and genres. They're not like those other directors who sell out and make mediocre trash. They're here to make high art like Scorsese does. But unlike the guy himself who respectfully once shared a valid opinion about some set of films, these pick-me filmmakers downright scorn and belittle entire genres and brands of storytelling because they can.
I've never really thought about doing a comic book movie. For me, it was more about this idea of doing a character study, but about somebody people have no idea who, what, where he came from or anything like that. So it kind of came at it that way. It wasn't like, oh, I want to make a Joker movie. It was really came from like, how do you make a great character study and get people to want to see it?
But don't let these pick-me directors fool you. They're no less hypocritical, money-hungry sellouts. They just want you to think and want to convince themselves that they aren't. So they will take up superhero, blockbuster films because of money, but that's not the main problem. The main problem is when they completely refuse to be professional or respectful towards any of it and will go to unreasonable lengths to justify the shameful decision and to make themselves feel better, branded as anything other than what it actually is. A money-making effort, because Lord knows it's definitely not an artistic one. This type of denial usually comes at a cost of one of the worst attempts at high art in the history of film, where the movies refuse to acknowledge their very roots and their IPs, while also pathetically trying to stand out as different to justify their mere existence, to only end up as a product with no identity, meaning, or integrity, while also dissatisfying and disrespecting their audiences because the filmmakers behind them secretly mock their subject of interest, and by extension, fans themselves. I don't think Joker 1 is a perfect film. It is a good film, but it's also a self-important film. Some will argue that's intentional. I would argue that's just Todd Phillips' scent rubbing off on it. If there's anything to take from the first Joker film, is that Phillips, as a filmmaker, is at his best when he's operating under some kind of pre-existing prompt. And by a prompt, I don't mean a Joaquin Phoenix fever dream Todd. The most creative aspects of the first Joker film was the ones he borrowed from other filmmakers. However, he did a superb job at competently and artfully stitching those together and crafting a beautifully well-made film. And that's not a problem itself, but it births a problem introduced in the sequel. This is a guy who was so fixated on emulating the style, aesthetics, and competence of great directors that he failed to fully grasp the sheer immensity and profundity of the notions he referenced.
Here is a man who would not take it anymore. A man who stood up against the scum, the cunts, the dogs, the filth, the shit. Here is someone who stood up.
Hence, he failed to understand the very story and the world he accidentally himself ended up crafting by combining such introspective concepts. There's no way a filmmaker who fully grasps and understands the ideas, characters, and world building introduced in Scorsese's Taxi Driver would pull a shocked Pikachu face after the audiences, unsurprisingly, resonate deeply with such world ideas and underdog characters. Therefore, Joker's philosophy turned out to be just as unfamiliar and inconvenient to Todd Phillips as an unwelcome stain on his designer shirt. But what do you do when your favorite piece of clothing gets stained? Wash it out? No! Not only did the success of the first film feed into Todd's self-importance, but it also fed into the illusion that he's capable of understanding his own story or characters.
What happens when you stop living that life and live as the shadow? And then you just make the movie and you forget all that. And you just make the film and you hope it makes sense on some level.
But as established, there is nothing Todd Phillips would rather not do than face or try to entertain the traces of reality echoed in his craft. So what do you do when you refuse to accept or even acknowledge the difficult, unfamiliar, and unpleasant mark on your dress shirt? Violently shatter every mirror in your house and refuse to look down, so you're no longer reminded of it, of course. Because living in denial is simpler and easier. It also tells the most boring stories. This sequel is what happens when the film is at war with itself. Can you imagine how exhausting it must be to actively demonize your main character, while also for some reason betting everything on a sheer expectation that the audience will somehow sympathize with him? And to achieve this, Todd steps in with a scalpel and surgically tries to cut Joker out of Arthur Fleck. But you can't just do that. Not only is it inconsistent, terrible writing, but also an epitome of dishonesty. And the number one rule you should follow as a storyteller to evoke emotional response from people is to be honest. When you're creating misery porn, you have to understand that your main target should be people's tear ducts, their emotions, but you can't evoke emotions if you're being deliberately deceiving, manipulative, and constantly insulting the intelligence and memory of your audience. A tragedy without authenticity turns into a comedy, but a comedy without a punchline is nothing but a tasteless joke. But before I go, I have an announcement to make. I just launched YouTube memberships for my channel, which is fun. You can get these customized badges or a set of emojis, which are quite limited at the time because YouTube demands quite a few members before I'll be able to make more. So if you want more, you can join in. And if you want to support the channel, which would be great because I really enjoy making these little guys. Also, you can check out my Patreon. And that was the announcement, and that was the video. And always remember, that's